Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to join us to talk about helping leaders lead in 2020. I am Steve Dion, and I'll be moderating our panel today. I'm excited to have three of our esteemed coaches that I've been working with for many, many years joining us today. We selected this panel of coaches today because they have some very unique and different insights into leadership coaching and are currently coaching leaders through this crisis, and we thought they'd bring a really good perspective today. I personally find each of them very authentic, each of them having very different approaches to the way that they lead, and each of them have a strong business background to bring to the table, but also a clear understanding of how to lead during times of crisis. When we came up with this topic, and this is one of a series of topics that we have that we're presenting and we're doing a webinar about every 3 weeks, we chose this because we realized that there is probably no other time in our lives where we're going to have to deal with a topic like this and leading in some very different times. You don't learn in business school how to lead in a pandemic. And we're learning as we go. We're helping leaders lead authentically. And so we wanted to take some time, pause a little bit and say, how is this different this year? What is different and what isn't different in the way that we are leading and coaching, and to hopefully give you some particular insights for you as a leader yourself on the ways that you can focus yourself right now during what's going on in this world to show up as best as you possibly can. And also, if you're a talent development professional, how you can help others lead and unpack ways and strategies as you have conversations with others. But before I get started, I want to explain who we are a little bit and why we are talking about this particular topic. So at Dion Leadership, our why behind what we do is that we really know and find a lot of importance in the idea of imagining your employees starting every day excited and ending every day accomplished. We believe that that creates a better society, that creates better businesses, and the way in which we have processes and systems and leadership will show up every day in a concerted way to accomplish this vision and goal. So the work that we do are in 6 different areas of solution, and the upper left one, leadership coaching, is the one we're talking about today. The last topic on our webinar series was leadership programs. We're going to eventually be talking about talent assessment and team effectiveness. We have those on our slate coming up shortly. But leadership coaching is where we're going to dig deep into today. And I just wanted to give a few minutes of an overview of coaching and what we mean by coaching. And then I'll turn it over to our panelists in short order to introduce themselves and dig right in. So we're only spent about 8 or 10 minutes in kind of framing the topic, but what's most important here is for you to hear from these experts who are seasoned professionals coaching leaders. So to ground us in leadership coaching, what coaching is, and coaching is different than training, than consulting, and coaching and cognitive behavioral learning is really setting the stage for new leadership behaviors. A coach is a thinking partner whose specific purpose is to help individuals develop personally and professionally. So we use this cognitive behavioral learning approach because what we're doing is not just teaching a skill, but we're creating a way to make sustainable change through helping people think differently. So this proven model for change and for development helps people look at new perspectives, understand themselves in new ways, and create new mindsets, particularly, so they can approach situations differently. And we definitely need to approach the world differently in the way that we're working today, virtually, and all new things that are coming up in our world. And we're trying to build new and productive habits. So we're not talking about training, we're talking about coaching. And in terms of coaching, I wanted to offer this. So as we think about this year and this coaching idea today, we start with these 5 different coaching lanes. So we try to start right up front and say, you know, when somebody's coming to us saying, I would like coaching to perform better, we pick a particular coaching lane, we pick a particular time that we coach somebody, and we use a specific process like this, and each of those coaching lanes have a process underneath them. And in most instances, year after year that we've been coaching, we have organizations that are relatively stable with pretty stable learning objectives, and the person's going to start, create a leadership development plan, and we're going to coach to those. Well, as starting in March, that sort of flew out the window, and we had to think very differently. And so right now, we would start with having a coaching goal, helping the coachee understand that goal, where they could practice it. So this would be a development plan. And what we're finding is that we had to do some pivoting with those and say what are important now and what's different. And what we're going to talk about today is how our coaches are coaching differently, and the insights that they're hearing from executives in the organizations that we work with doing things differently. But before we get into our panel, we wanted to pause and just get a good pulse check from the audience here. And in a minute, I'm going to, or Lauren's going to put up a poll and ask you to answer the question, does your organization use leadership coaching? So we'd like to get a sense of who's on the line here. And the answers are regularly, occasionally, or rarely, or never. So if you could please just take a quick second to answer that. And as you're doing that also, I'd like to say that while we have a fair amount of people on the webinar today, we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So I just wanted to prompt your thinking now to start thinking about some questions you have for Bill, Stan, or Marianne. And we'll be getting to those shortly. I'll prompt a few questions, but would love to really guide our discussion today off of what you find as to be important. So the results are 40% of those on our webinar today are using coaching regularly. This will help our panelists here to help determine how they want to approach our conversation today. 43 occasionally, and only 17% rarely or never. So I guess what I'm taking from this you are folks that are interested in the topic already, and it may have a point of view and position. So this is great that we don't have to start with explaining what coaching is and having a framework. So thank you for that. So before I turn it over to our panelists and pose the first question, and in that first question, they'll also introduce themselves with a little bit of background, I wanted to take just a minute because we recently decided to do a study, and this has not been shown to anybody else before. This is hot off the presses. We closed this literally a week ago and are writing up a white paper right now. But we wanted to understand a case for leadership coaching in the time of COVID-19. And I just have 3 or 4 slides, and then again, we'll turn it over. But I thought this is a sort of some interesting results and get you thinking about coaching and its impact. So what we decided to do here at Dion Leadership is we conducted a survey, as I mentioned, just recently, where we went back and surveyed all of the folks that we've coached since January of 2018 to today. And so some of the folks are still in coaching, some have completed coaching, but all relatively recently. And they come from all industries, all organizational levels. Typically, our clients have 10,000 employee lives or more. Most of the coachees have a title of director, vice president, chief. So those are the people that we asked, and we had a nice response rate. And of those coaching lanes I shared earlier, the participants may have been exclusively in a leadership coaching program, so in one of those coaching lanes, or they may have been part of a leadership development program, like a high potential program where they receive a separate coach from leadership sessions. So we went out and surveyed, and hot off the presses, here's what we found. So 95% of the people in our survey reported that they thought about leadership coaching during the coronavirus pandemic. So the first thing we wanted to ask was, you have this process in coaching. Did you throw that all out the window and just start to focus on something else? Or did leadership coaching become part of your purview, even if we weren't coaching the person actively? So that's great news, and almost everybody said they did think about coaching. Peeling that back further, the 83% of the participants reported that their coaching provided insights that particularly helped them better navigate times of uncertainty, which is what people are in right now. And their coaching program may have started and actually may have completed before this happened. So managing uncertainty may not have been the learning goal in and of itself, but the coaching process of using cognitive behavioral learning and being open for understanding the world from a different point of view help people during COVID-19. The next question, or response to that question, was 93% of folks said that they are better equipped to utilize new behaviors that they need during COVID-19 because of their coaching. So we're delighted to have that feedback, and it's good to know that the coaching that we're doing is supporting coachees during COVID-19. And peeling it back to one next granular level, what specifically did they find of most value? So 83% of those participating in the survey reported that they have benefited from particularly their focus on the most important work that they do. They have also, the majority of them said they've strengthened their interpersonal skills and that they have a stronger, longer term perspective as they go through this year, that they're making better decisions, they've improved their confidence, and they've reduced their stress level. So coaching works. We've always believed that coaching works. I'm glad to see a study to report that not only does it work in times when the wind is at our back, when it's normal times in the world, but it also works when the rubber meets the road and we need to do something better or different. I know this is just a high-level report. I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time for dialogue with our coaches. That's what you're here for. So I'll stop on that right now, but we'll let you know that as we write up the final study, we will be publishing it, and we commit to sending it out to all those that are on the webinar today. So with that, I am so excited to turn it over to learn myself from three of our wonderful coaches. As I mentioned, I'm going to start with a question for each of them to prompt us getting going here, but I will turn it over to them, and I ask that you type in the chat, and as we get a theme of questions, we'll pause and turn it over to them. So let's first start with each of the coaches to answer this question. And I'll start with Stan. Stan, can you personally share, and each of you, I'd like to ask you the same question. How do you get centered and balanced as you've unpacked what's happened since March with the coronavirus so that you can best show up to lead your coachees in the way that you can best do that?
Well, thanks, Steve, and good morning, everyone. You know, those that know me know that I tend to be a list person, and I tend to rely on routines to sort of ground myself. And so what I found to be helpful for me in terms of being centered is really maintaining the routines that I have found have been helpful for me to establish my presence and to sort of launch my day. So, you know, I've got a regular routine that I've probably practiced for the last 12 or 13 years of some quiet time and reflection and reading in the morning. It sort of gets my mind in the right space of being open and expansive. And so that I've been able to maintain that, and that's really, really essential for me. I tend to be a list person. And so particularly when we're dealing with COVID-19 and all the news, I distill things down to just a couple of lists. So the author, Atul Gawande, mentioned, you know, there's 4 things on the list that you personally can pay attention to. So, you know, if you're just basically take care of hygiene, maintaining social distance, getting tested if you feel symptoms, and wear a mask. So once I have those 4 things on my list, I can kind of set that aside, and I can filter out a lot of the static on the line. And then within that, since I have not experienced any symptoms, I literally every day go through a personal health self-screen. Again, 4 things on my list. Do you have a headache? Do you have a fever? Do you have a sore throat? Are you able to breathe well? Once I've gone through that, then I can be alert to things that would tell me that it's time for me to adjust my behavior, but I don't have to be alarmed by things. And so I kind of crib that language from David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute, understanding the balance between being alert and being alarmed helps me to stay focused and balanced.
Thanks, Dan. Marianne, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. I'm Marianne Rivers, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. My way of staying grounded, I think, comes down to balance. And I've always sort of kept my life, or at least I would say more post-corporate world, since I've been doing this professionally for 10 years and learned the hard way what happens when you don't stay grounded and have balance. That it's a physical, emotional, and mental spectrum. And all of those three things have to be there for me to make me feel like I can stay grounded. And learning that I like Stan, the morning is really, really important. So I've had a routine for years, but I keep changing it. And I will say that maybe one of the greatest blessings out of this whole time has been, it has made me dig in deeper to that groundedness and that process, so that I am physically active. I have a workout group that I fought hard to go on Zoom with. It was not easy at first. Like, do I really have to do this? I had to change my routine. But once I got through that shock and we all came together, now I love it. Now I wouldn't give it up. So I have a great trainer that we work with in a group of women, and that keeps me grounded. And then the mental, emotional, they're sort of blended together for me, but making sure I'm feeding my brain with positive things. So my husband used to make fun of me about, not knowing if some major world event would happen, because I watch very little news. And now he's starting to realize why. I always find out the things I really need to know. Oddly, I didn't get lost in this whole COVID thing without knowing what was going on. And so I make sure that I'm feeding my mind with the positive things and making sure that I'm questioning, are these things are they true? And the last thing I'll say is meditation. I did some training a couple of years ago with my son in transcendental meditation. I've been meditating for 10 years prior to that, but that really, I am so thankful now that I went through that training, because it has been rock solid for me, and getting more quiet and more reflective, and for myself personally, and having that go-to has been just life-saving. So that's my routine, and that's what I found works.
Thanks, Marianne.
So from my standpoint, I'm going to probably end up reiterating a lot of what I've already heard from my colleagues, Marianne and Stan. And I think what it comes down to is a plan. We're all working from home. It's very easy to not be so disciplined in, not having the structure of getting in the car and driving to an office and spending 8 hours in an office and working with colleagues all day long and going to meetings. So I find out what works for me is a combination of some of the things we've just heard. I start my morning with a devotion and a meditation, and spend some time kind of grounding myself that way. I then review my calendar and my to-do list to find out what the priorities of the day are. Where am I going to be? What am I going to be doing? How am I going to approach what I'm going to be working on? I have a designated work area. Okay, that's another way that I stay centered as well. When I'm at this desk, I'm working. When I'm downstairs, I'm reading a book or I'm doing something else. I take regular breaks throughout the course of the day. I love to eat. Unfortunately, sometimes I should be drinking more water instead of eating, but sometimes throw a load of laundry in or pick up a magazine for 5 minutes and read it. Those are things too that break up the need to sit here. And my wife will get after me too. She say, "You can't sit at that chair for 8 hours. Get up and move around and go do something." So she's great at that. The other thing with me is exercise. I find that going to the gym, I know some of the gyms are closed right now, but going outside and cutting the grass is great mental time for me to just be by myself. There's no interruptions. I'm just cutting the grass. I know people think I'm crazy because I love to cut my grass. But even going for a walk in the woods is a great way to kind of get some exercise in as well. And I think lastly, I want to just hit on the social media thing and the whole media thing. I'm allowed 5 minutes of media and social media per day. There's just so much fear and gloom and doom in the world these days. It's like, and I don't know what's true anymore and what's not true. And instead of just listening to everything and being bombarded, I rely on my wife to give me 5 minutes. She can give me 5 minutes of Facebook updates, 5 minutes of CNN or whatever's going on, and that's about it for me. So like you, Marianne, I find that I get everything that I need in those 5 minutes, and everything else is just noise. So I try to keep my focus and keep my boundaries. That's pretty much me.
Well, thanks for the introduction, all three of you. And I look forward to digging a little bit deeper into some of these subjects. Folks, please add to the chat as you can, and we'll summarize some of those questions that you have. But the next question I wanted to prompt, and Marianne, we'll start with you, and we're not going to go down the line for everybody, so I'll give Marianne this question next, is building upon that. I realize that some of our coachees have not had years of studying transcendental meditation, as you mentioned, or other strategies. Mm-hmm. So how are you coaching specifically to help your executives that you coach find resilience and balance during this time?
I think the most common thing I find with hard charging, very successful leaders and executives is that they put themselves last very regularly. They're so caught up or so busy in trying to meet expectations of their work life and their family life and do everything for everybody else, that the very first thing is just starting to get them to realize that they can't give what they don't have, and stepping back and finding their joy first. And especially during these times when, in some of the cases, the folks that I were coaching, they were literally, healthcare executives who were on the front lines, who were day in, day out, and just going at it 24/7. And you can do that for a period of time, but then you have to stop. And luckily, in all these instances, one of them actually took a vacation for a week and got away, was able to get away. Another person we talked about, luckily the springtime came and he got back to gardening. So it's helping them figure out what is their number one joy, if nothing else, and how can they put that in their life and give that and let themselves off the hook a little bit to give to themselves first, so that they can then nurture and be there for everyone else. And it's just like when they're planning their day, it's just the same thing about how to organize a day. And the hardest part that I find executives, they resist, they believe theoretically, but the practice of blocking out time during their day or their week for planning, strategizing, thinking, being alone. And they always give it away. And sometimes it'll take a repeated coaching session. I could ask, Bill and Stan how many times sometimes it takes for someone to finally get it and then have that, oh my gosh, this is life-changing. But just getting them to realize that they matter and their time is important and makes a difference. And I think that has been probably the number one thing, having them step back for themselves.
Awesome. Actually, we had a follow-up question that just came in, so I'll pose it to you right now, specifically to this topic. So how are you getting leaders taking time to have coaching sessions so they do this? And given that you said that they don't give for themselves, or they don't take for themselves as much as they need to.
Right. Well, I'll be honest, they're depending upon the situation, and I'm pretty flexible and open as a coach. So I let people, if there's travel, I'm not we better meet on this day. And if you better be available, especially during COVID. I think I gave people a lot more grace but to the point where that became a problem for them, I would step in and, friendly reminders, checking in, text, hey, how you doing? Just want to see how things are going. You want to do a 20-minute call? Let's just see where you're at, just to get them to sort of maybe snap out of it for a minute. And what I found is that if you just keep that, just like with people, if you're a leader and how do you lead in times like this? Just stay present. Don't let them forget about you and that support and that relationship, and change it up. Do it differently. Do it in a way that is more accommodating to them, or that gives them an opportunity to not feel guilty about not taking the time. And eventually I was able to lure, or whatever the right word is, back in everybody who had sort of gone off the grid because they were so caught up in things. So just stay with it. If you have somebody who, encourage them and remind them that it's important for them to take that time. They'll be so much more productive, effective, efficient if they actually take that time for coaching.
I would just real quick, I just kind of ditto what Marianne just said. I kind of had the same situation with several of my clients, and that they kind of went radio silent on me. And I just continued with a quick text here and there, a quick email, maybe even posing a question. What are you doing to take care of yourself? Okay. What's challenging you right now? Just something sweet and short to the point. I can't write a book because they're obviously so busy that they have many other priorities. But I think the ongoing just being mindful and being there for them. I would agree.
Thank you.
And, well, and one thing I'd add to that is, you know, there's an interplay or a dance that occurs here, and I guess this dance metaphor comes up for me. You know, we put together a coaching action plan, and people understand what the things are that they want to focus on as their goals or their leadership behaviors. And what I've found is really the task for me as a coach is to really focus on the application of those things they've identified. So there might be what I like to describe as these intergalactic ideas that they want to pursue professionally. But when they're faced with these kinds of issues that come up in the case of a crisis or a pandemic, it's important to walk through a series of questions that just say, you know, we started out talking about A, B, and C. I'm curious, now that you've been put to the test, what are the ways in which A, B, and C are more important to you now or less important to you than they were when we first sat down? And that framing allows them to find immediate application for the coaching. And I found that to be a helpful strategy to help them to begin to think about, you know, how am I going to actually put this to use? And as a result, in being able to be adaptive enough to recognize that the thing we talked about last time might not be the most pressing thing before them this time, my ability to be flexible and respond to what's really at the core of today's concern, and then connecting that to a broader concern, I found that to be a very helpful strategy for integrating longer term or broader coaching ideas with the here and now and the urgency of the moment.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan. And sticking with you, I'd like to switch gears, but if you could answer this question. We saw in the study I reported earlier that leaders are finding that focusing on the most important work is a benefit from leadership coaching. That is probably a bigger challenge for folks this year, where strategies and operating plans just got ripped up and had to start over. So can you talk about how you're helping coachees in focusing on the most important work right now?
Sure. You know, one of the images that comes to mind is kind of a joking reference, but, you know, when he was the scariest man in a boxing ring, it's reputed that Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan for the fight until they get hit in the mouth. And that thought or that point of view really is helpful for dealing with the kinds of situations we're dealing with right now. So we begin with a plan. People have a sense of what the outcomes are that they want to achieve. And part of the task of coaching is to help them examine those outcomes, and then also look at the kinds of scenarios that might affect their ability to achieve those outcomes. So the planning is really an important piece of focusing on the most important work. But as I used a reference before of a dance, the dance is between planning and flexibility. So in a boxing ring, the feedback loop is immediate. You know, you drop that lead hand, you get hit in the mouth, you realize I've got to take some different action. So in these times, you have a plan in place. You have to always, and I work with and coach individuals to focus on, so where are you getting your feedback? Where's the information coming from that will help you to understand whether your plan can be carried out as you've conceived it, or whether that plan needs to be adjusted? And so, you know, that transparency and the curiosity and the vulnerability that come with being open to feedback from the environment is what helps them to bridge their plan to the flexibility that it takes to have the humility to adjust that plan and respond in the moment. And so that's really the focus that I have in coaching around focusing on the most important work really revolves around this interplay between what was the plan, what are the scenarios that I've envisioned, and given those scenarios, what's the feedback that I'm receiving from my environment that tells me I've got to be flexible enough to adjust the plan. And you know, it's sort of like a lather, rinse, repeat. You put the plan in place, you seek the feedback, you respond to the feedback, and you repeat that as often as needed.
Thanks. Anything else you two want to add to that, or shall we move on?
That's very well said. I can't add a thing.
Good job, Stan.
Thanks.
Well, you just teed up an area there when you mentioned about the feedback and learning from somebody to adjust your focus area. So the next area I wanted to focus on, and Bill, I'll throw this one to you, is effective communication. So that's always challenging to do for organizations, even in a face-to-face world, of being able to communicate vision, mission, strategy, activities from the top to the bottom of an organization. How should leaders be communicating in their organization right now? And how are they doing that in a virtual environment?
Okay, so I think, you know, kind of piggybacking off of what Stan's already mentioned, this whole idea about flexibility and scenarios. I mean, we have a very uncertain future right now. It seems like every day some new law is coming out, some new rule is coming out. People are concerned. People are concerned about the security of their jobs, their personal health, safety of their families. There's a lot of stress for everyone right now. And I think as leaders, what I'm finding with the folks that I've been coaching is that there's this inherent need for acting with a sense of urgency. I think that's what I'm going to call it, acting with a sense of urgency, sharing the plan, sharing the vision, what's going on, making sure that people are informed and people that are connected with what's going on in the organization. This could mean updating people on a daily basis. What's new, what's changing. I mean, again, we talked about the scenarios and the flexibility. What you thought was A, B, and C when you started this whole thing back in February, and now are A, B, and C still relevant? Are they still important? And how, in fact, are we going to maintain that that priority, that sense of priority, so to speak? You know, another component. I have another. I have an example of a division president that spends a lot of time with manufacturing in China right now. And, you know, you add that international level of complexity, and how important is communication with, you know, what's being manufactured now, at what levels, you know, what's being shipped, what's in the pipeline, you know, what are the customers' demands, what are the customers' new demands, so to speak. So that takes that level of communication and makes it that much more important. So when we start talking about virtual communication, we're starting to look at more deliberate communication. I'm finding that virtually requires more deliberation. With staff meetings, project team meetings, strategic meetings, you can't just walk down the hallway and have a chat with somebody, okay? It's just not gonna work like that. So there requires a little bit of planning and forethought. I think agendas and priorities for meetings are what I'm hearing. Keeping it simple, sticking to the essentials. We're spending all day long at home on Skype, on webinars, in Zoom meetings, in video conference and texting, staying focused with what needs to be accomplished. So I think setting an expectation for people. Virtually, setting an expectation means holding people accountable, setting a goal or an idea in place and making sure that people fulfill that obligation. In a virtual setting, through one-on-ones, through team meetings maybe. Anticipating challenges and conflicts. How many times you get in a Zoom meeting these days and there's 20 people in the Zoom meeting and you hear from 4 or 5 of them, but the 2 or 3 that have the most important information aren't speaking up. How are you getting that out? Whether it's in that meeting or whether it's afterwards, but you need to be cognizant as a leader of what information you're getting and what information you're not getting in those meetings, okay? So it requires that sixth sense, so to speak. On another level, social time. Many of you probably know what I mean by social time, virtual happy hours. A lot of organizations are having these virtual happy hours where, you know, it's gonna be after 5 o'clock, we're all gonna have a beer and we're gonna just chat about, you know, what's going on right now? What are you struggling with? What's working for you? What are your priorities? Also during the daytime, maybe virtual coffee breaks. So at 9 o'clock every morning, we're gonna have a 15-minute virtual coffee break. Instead of doing a stand-up meeting, we're going to kind of chat about what's new with you, what's going on with the weather, how's your family doing, those kinds of things. And finally, I guess with regard to virtual communications, one-on-one time and how important that is. Whether it's your direct reports, whether it's your peers, even your bosses, the ability to give an opportunity for people to just talk about what's on their minds. Just some time to listen and be empathetic to their needs. To the degree that you know your people, to the degree you have trust with your people, they'll be that much more open to you to tell you what's really on their minds. I'm not about to tell you about my family's situation, how we're in such emotional turmoil right now over COVID-19 if I don't have a relationship with you? So as a leader, we need to anticipate how we can build those relationships and build them to the next level. Will that work with everybody? Probably not. But the bottom line is being there for your people. So I think empathy, listening skills, asking good questions, and you have to ascertain what's the most appropriate forum for that. A one-on-one, a team meeting, a group conference, what is it? So those are just some initial ideas that I've come across in some of my coaching.
Awesome, Bill, thanks. Anything else, Stan or Marianne, related to communication that you're seeing from your coachees, and any other comments on that before we move on?
I guess the only thing I'd tag on that in part in response to a question that popped up in the chat box is around being clear about expectations. And to have the conversation about expectations really is the basis for holding people accountable and, more importantly, being held accountable. And so to begin the expectation conversation with letting people know, this is what you can expect of me. And my request of you is tell me when I have or have not met that expectation. If there's something I've told you you can expect and I'm not delivering on it, I'd appreciate it if you would do me the honor of telling me, Stan, you missed the mark. And that openness, that vulnerability then earns you the right to say in turn, and here's some things that I expect of you. And if those things haven't been met, I'm not making it a personal attack. You and I will both look at our shared expectation and evaluate whether or not that's been met or not. And I think particularly in a virtual environment when you don't have the benefit of management by walking around, clarity around expectations is really, really crucial.
I would just add a couple quick things to the expectations, which is absolutely the case. But the process of in a group setting, in whether it's in person or is even more important, I think, virtually, is what are the ground rules that the group wants to live by to hold each other accountable. So showing up on time for virtual meetings, not wasting people's time, not putting your name up on the, if everybody needs to be seen and not just doing something in the background, simple little ideas, but having ground rules for team expectations that we decide on early on so that we can check every so often if we're actually accomplishing or living by those ground rules and when we're not, and how we can adjust back the other way. And then the one-on-ones, I think I would also just mention, like in any situation, it's not about how you want to communicate, but how do the people that you want to build that relationship with. So if they're tired of Zoom calls and video calls and they'd rather just do a phone call, great. Ask them how they'd like to be communicated to and with, so that it's making it about their time and giving them kind of a relief as opposed to having to do it the same way all the time.
Yeah, just one final comment about the accountability thing too, and that's I talked about the importance of having agendas for these virtual meetings too, so that we're not just kind of winding all over the place. I think if we take the meeting agendas, if we document the expectations, what needs to be done, who will do it by when, and there are some kind of formal meeting minutes that come out of a virtual meeting that kind of identify those things, that becomes the springboard for the next meeting then. And it also has that element of accountability in there, because is it clear what you need to do? Is it clear what I need to do? Are we serving each other appropriately? Are there things that are missing? Let's talk about those now before we document it and move on.
Great comments, everybody. And I'll add in too that one of the things I'm seeing and hearing from our clients is that they're struggling with leaders saying, I'm used to feeling comfortable as a manager because I can see my people working. And it's driving me crazy not being able to see somebody working. So to this point about accountability, having some trust with somebody is really important to extend that, but understanding what are you accomplishing in the day and keeping that feedback loop open. But then when people are meeting, I'm also hearing and seeing folks not taking as much advantage of the technology that their organizations have for them. So as you mentioned, Marianne, people use Zoom or Team or Skype, but don't require video even. And that's a beginning of accountability right there, is if this is a meeting in which interpersonal I need to see you because it's going to be more effective, then it's a screen, it's not an option, it's required.
Right.
And then reinforce that. And then being able to even use the breakout rooms or the raise hand feature or chat. You can have great meetings using this technology and really do some things that it's hard to do if you just jump in a conference room for your weekly staff meeting. So leverage those tools and techniques to communicate two-way feedback and communicate and be more effective as a team, take notes in real time, take a screenshot, publish them. I mean, there's some great things we can do. And so leaning into this, not as an alternative, as a negative alternative, but potentially as a solution for being more effective, I think can switch people's mindset for how they communicate and meet across the organization. Another question I'd like to get into then is that we've heard this term and this idea of CEO being Chief Empathy Officer. So to build on this point of communication, what are you seeing with CEOs being not just communicating business information, facts, strategy, but choosing to be more empathetic, to be more vulnerable? How easy or hard is it to do that? And why at the beginning of this, different than 2008, did leaders lean right into this idea of empathy and caring? And how is that being unpacked in your coaching sessions? And is that something that's just written up in the media, or are you seeing it real time? And how important is it to the way leaders are going to need to lead in the future? And I'll throw that to anybody who'd like to answer that.
I'll start. I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to a couple of the executives, several are, like I mentioned before, healthcare executives. So they were put in situations right away where, I mean, they're in it. And what I've seen has been in almost every case, well, they have had to be very selfless. They actually, I've seen one instance where the corporate edict was for this person to not be present or put themselves out there for health potential concerns. And he chose not to listen because his, theory was, I'm asking everybody else to be on the front line. How can I, in this organization, look myself in the mirror if I'm not willing to go out? And this is someone who is very actively always been a sort of lead by walking around. And so he became more visible, more involved, did more, walking through the organization in every possible area, thinking about making sure they're not leaving somebody out, just being present and visible and taking feedback and listening and being vulnerable enough to know that sometimes they didn't have the answers and they didn't have to, and they had to just be upfront about, what they do know at this point in time, what they don't know, and being courageous enough to go out there and do that. And just by being, I think they were forced to be much more transparent because of the situation that they were actually faced with and dealing with. So that's been my experience so far. And then the only other thing I'll say is that working with several of them going through these horrific financial situations, some of them have found themselves in where they're now having to let people go, communicate really tough messages, and the wordsmithing and the careful selection of how they, whether it's virtually or in live environments, speak to various groups, saying that they have to protect and keep people on the front line, but not making the support organization feel like they're second-class citizens. I mean, there's a really tricky nuance to that communication, and them having to be very deliberate and stepping back in the way they do that.
Well, I dovetail from the idea around vulnerability. One of the first acts of vulnerability is saying, I don't know. And when we talk about the bridge between that and empathy, to the extent that people are confronted with situations that are unprecedented, in their heart of hearts, they're saying, I just don't know. It can be intimidating, and it can create a barrier if the leader always seems to have the answers. And so being very intentional about the curiosity of saying, I don't know, or, can you help me with this, is one of those acts of empathy, I think, that in a couple of cases with conversations I've had has really paid some dividends in terms of having people have a sense of, you're in this with me and we're trying to solve it together. And I think a second element of empathy that I touch on just briefly, and it dovetails to the virtual piece, is, just this forum that we're using. We're invited into people's homes when they're working virtually in many cases. There's a vulnerability that's there, and having an empathy around that. So, not to be the contrarian around always being on camera, but, one of the, I think, really great best practices that came up, and I've shared with some of my clients, is within IBM, they put together a set of guidelines and principles around how are we going to manage in this virtual world. And one of those principles was to extend grace around things like, I know your dog's going to bark, your kid's going to come in the background, that's okay. To extend grace around, sometimes we all have non-camera moments. I'm not going to judge you harshly if you have a not ready for prime time, not ready for camera day. So we can simultaneously say it's important for us to see each other and honor the fact that sometimes you probably don't want to see me. And so having the grace to navigate that, I think, is part of the empathy that leaders are bringing today.
You know what, Stan, I love what you're saying. And I just want to add one more component to that. I actually have a leader that's been asked to be invited to some of the team meetings so that he could be there to listen to concerns, to answer any possible questions that are possible. But again, I love the idea of the guidelines and principles for virtual meetings and extending grace to people, but also having that executive vulnerable enough to be able to walk into a manufacturing team meeting or a project team meeting and be willing to sit there and say, hey, if you invite me to your team meeting, I'm willing to just listen and answer any questions I can possibly do for you. And that's a level of vulnerability as well.
Yeah.
And a leader doesn't have to get on an airplane, fly to make a site visit, take 2 days out of their time to go pop into a plant and see what's going on. They can just jump on their next Zoom call. So there's some great, approaches to leverage the situation that we're in. I wanted to be mindful of our time, and I have I think the last two questions, but we'll see how quick we go. One is more sort of procedural, so I'll start with that in terms of, for those that on the line that are coaches themselves, one question about how has your coaching changed during this? Did you decide to say, let's just coach to the issue at hand, or we need to stick to the coaching plan? We did a 360 and this whole robust plan for how you need to be a leader down the road. Let's stick to that, or did you somehow blend it? So how is your coaching sessions particularly changed during COVID?
Well, I think I kind of tipped my hand a bit in terms of this, to understand that the plan represented a set of actions that we had chosen given a scenario that we thought was going to occur. And for various people, probably starting on or about the 12th or 13th of March, it became clear that scenario was no longer the scenario we were going to work through. And so I have adjusted and adapted timing, topics, pace, all of those things to respond to what's present now. And I think one of the ways that I've bridged that is, again, relying on something that's old and kind of tried and true, to begin with the question, what's become clear for you since the last time that we met? Sometimes that clarity is around something we've talked about before. Sometimes that clarity is an awareness that the leader has of themselves that never came up before. But that question asks them to reflect on, what are they paying attention to? What answers do they now have that they can act on or build into a new scenario? And I think that allows them to gradually move and adjust their focus and priorities to new and emerging issues as they arise.
I would say, like Stan, I've always coached to sort of get up above things, big picture, where you're going, get down in the weeds with real live situations going on for the practice and the application, and done that similar dance. I would say maybe I have gone a little bit more laser focused on the need for the real time. These are big issues going on, and maybe spending more time on working through the new manpower plan or whatever, rolling up your sleeves and getting into that, and being more flexible on the long-term plans, just reminding we're still headed down this road. The one practice I did periodically in the past, but I've found with everyone I've been coaching recently, they've really appreciated it and asked for more of it. And so I do it regularly now, is I will send maybe 4 or 5, that's maybe even too many, but coaching reflection questions the week prior to our meeting, so that they can sit back and think about what's most important. And I say, just, even if you send it that morning or the night before, that's great, but give me a little heads up so I can get prepared as a coach, and I can really put my thinking cap on and adjust slightly. But what it does for them is it grounds them to say, okay, this is what I really need right now. And the questions are all focused around what is most needed now, what are the important things now, how can I help you the most? And without fail, everyone who I've started to more regularly do that has said, thank you, keep doing this, it's helpful.
I probably ditto what Marianne just said. I have something called a pre-session form, and it's the same thing, 4 or 5 questions. What have you accomplished since the last time we talked? What haven't you accomplished? Why? What's on your mind? Okay. We might have, like Stan said, we might have been focusing on A, B, and C, and there's a good possibility that boom, E came up. Well, guess what? That's what I want to focus on today. I just need somebody to grill me on what I'm thinking and challenge me on what I'm thinking and help me to sort out what I'm thinking. So I find that having the coachees fill those documents out in advance does bring them with a level of preparedness too. It's a whole different coaching meeting when someone's prepared and they've thought through those things versus somebody that's just winging it. You find a lot more value in those conversations. So I agree with you.
Thanks for that. And the other thing I'm picking up as a thread between all of you is, and this is something that I know we've always valued as coaches, is the coaching process is not here as a venting process. This isn't EAP or therapy or helping you feel better today. What you just really showed is, while we are trying to stick to a plan, we will be flexible because their job may change over the life of the coaching, but the focus is still to help them perform better in their role, to challenge their assumptions, to help them create new strategies, to think from a different perspective and point of view, to be a better lifelong learner. All the things you just talked about help to sort of show that it's flexible, yet it's not just there to say, I want to feel better by the end of this hour. That's not what coaching is all about. So I appreciate you reinforcing that as well. So last question in closing, and Stan, you may have answered this in your last one because you gave a great question as you said, as you answered the last question that you use with your coachees. So I'll start with Bill then on this one. Is what's a great question you've been using for leaders to particularly reflect upon, or maybe like Marianne, this would be one of those questions you've been sending out in advance. Is there one particular one that we could leave people with as it particularly relates to the current COVID-19 world?
Yeah, I hate to be cliche, but what's keeping you up at night right now? I mean, it comes right down to the point of what's your priority right now. So that would be a question I would consider. What's keeping you up at night right now?
Okay, great. Marianne, any last question there before we start to do our close?
I think I'd go back to something similar to how we opened with, what are you doing to ground yourself currently? I mean, just because people are dealing with, just to think about that, what is it that you most need to be grounded and focused in this, either whether it's a session or the week or the following time frame.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I want to be respectful of time, and we are about 5 minutes to the hour. So let me put up our slides back again really quick here, and we will close. And Stan, as we did our prep, Stan came up with a great summary here. So if you would mind starting our closing session with some observations from our time today together.
Sure, Steve. Just briefly, recently in working with a client, we he happens to be an avid golfer, and I'm drawn to metaphors that help people to kind of connect their work to things that are familiar to them. And so I referenced to him that back, it's probably been 30 or 40 years ago, the greatest instructional sports video of all time is something called Golf My Way by Jack Nicklaus. And I referenced Golf My Way with this client. He said, you know, I've got that video. And in fact, that really was formative for me. And so we talked about that. And one of the things that's in that video that comes out, Jack Nicklaus says, in golf, there are 14 clubs in the bag, but there's only one swing. And he goes on to talk about how there are some things that are so foundational that regardless of your circumstances, if you can focus on those foundations, everything else falls into place. And so it doesn't matter if it's Sunday afternoon in Augusta and you're putting for a green jacket, or if it's Tuesday afternoon in your golf league and you're just trying to break 100 for the first time, the foundational things of the swing. You know, am I square to the ball? You know, what's my balance? You know, all of those kinds of things. How do I handle my takeaway, my follow through? If we master those foundational things, everything else falls into place. And much the same is true for us today. We're not so much asking people and helping people to find new skills or new characteristics. We're asking them to really redouble their efforts on things that they know matter. And so, you know, awareness, agility, and courage are the three things that I distill those down to. And in some form, if we as leaders and coaches are able to encourage people to figure out what are the things about which I need to be aware? What are the other things that are on the horizon that I need to be agile enough to take into consideration? And how do I develop the courage to adjust my focus in response to what's new, even though that might cause me to be ridiculed by people that say that I'm wishy-washy or you didn't say that yesterday. That combination of awareness, agility, and courage is a foundational set of skills. And the only difference today is that the stakes are higher and the consequences are higher. Those things have always been important. But when we're in these crucial times now, the inability or the unwillingness to do those things really shows up immediately, which amps up our need to help people focus on those things that are foundational more consistently. Hence the need for exceptional leadership right now, hence the benefit of coaching to help people be continually grounded again in the foundational things that they know have always been at the core of their success.
Thanks, Stan. Thanks for that summary. Let me just do a couple of housekeeping things as we close for just 30 seconds here, and some other closing thoughts. Just to let you know that we will be sending this recording out to the group, and feel free to share that to others if you think it would be helpful to them. We'll be sending it out no later than tomorrow. And our full coaching study, expect to see that within probably about 2 weeks. We're writing it up in more of a white paper format, and we'll make sure we get that out to you. We're really enjoying, I have to say, the interaction with our community on leadership development and learning. And we are doing these at about every 3 weeks. We have more resources on our website related to coaching and other hot topics related to COVID-19 leadership activities. So feel free to check that out. And if you're not getting this because you found it on LinkedIn or Facebook or somewhere, please do go to our website and join our newsletter, and we'll send you invites to future webinar topics, white papers, ebooks, and we have a few publications that are going to be coming out as well. We also have a recording from our last session. So if you're a learning and development professional and want to dig deeper into learning in a virtual world and strategies to moving from classroom learning to blended learning, we're happy to send you the recording to that. Feel free to share that, your interest in that in the chat box, and Lauren can send you that link. And this last area are 4 items we put on our website that we're seeing as hot topics right now. We talked about communicating differently. So these are 4 solutions that we've developed. If any of those are of interest to you and you wanted to learn more, you can see program designs for our Leading Through Crisis program. That's more about coaching application, learning and development activities on virtual learning, and building resilience program. So topics that were that came up today, I wanted to share those as well. And then last, our next webinar will be on August 11th, and it will be from two of our experts in communication, and it will be called Practical Skills for Communicating Effectively in a Virtual World. So we'll be talking about everything from how you communicate in more of a formal setting if you need to communicate to the organization, to how do you run an effective team meeting, to giving feedback one-on-one, but you're doing it virtually, and what would that look like? So hopefully you will find that valuable, and we'd love you to join. Feel free to sign up for that. We'll be sending the link to that when we complete this. And I just wanted to say thank you. We're grateful that you are spending some time with us today. Good luck with yourself. Be safe, be well. Thank you so much to our three panelists for sharing your wisdom today. And we look forward to additional conversations with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.